by, the wonderful people who are the patrons of the project, so that the old RJ can continue to do this, which is to suddenly stop sharing and resume the subject matter of the material. Things will get a little bit more dicey as we move in through December, as we start hitting the holidays, and I'm still kind of figuring out how many days will kind of be occupied by being other than here to do videos on that. We'll cross that bridge, and so maybe another show or two, and then it'll be emptiness until 2023, when we are back from our holiday visiting with relatives. So the wonderful, exciting world of will we ever get past replacing Darwin, Nathaniel Jeanson's not that big of a book, not that big of references. He's functionally not having any new sources knocking along. From what I've looked farther ahead, it looks like he's just nicking some of the same material he's already had. But as you have noticed, the many, many last weeks that we have had, he's been doing this trick, putting up cute little charts that all look exactly the same, pretty much, where he distributes a selected number of species from families that all magically are appearing after the flood. And in this case, he's got about 26 or so species dots of sharks, one family of sharks, which he lists as the tiger sharks, Carcharhinidae, tongue twister of a name, in roughly the 1100 years after the flood. So that's whittling us down to around 1250 BCE. Again, not a single source in his reference base directly that pertains to that. Oh, hi, Barbara. Good morning. But that doesn't mean there isn't anything. By the way, just to remind everybody of how this stuff looks in the meat of things, when he's constructing his charts, he's doing this stuff here. Masses of NC numbers from databases that you'd have to go through and find the database and locate those nodes and download that information, which presumably he's done. Fortunately, I don't have to do that. Some future person may want to go through and actually ferret out where he's gleaning his information and how he's assembling the data fields that he does. But since he's dealing with a particular family, by definition, the critters that are in that family base are the ones that are folding into his chart somehow or other, somewhere or other. Is he putting all the data in? That immediately comes up. Well, turns out it looks like he's leaving species out again, because there are some 50 to 60 in the family, not 36. And the family originated at least by the early Cretaceous, which we can tell by teeth, which is why this show is called Oh, the Shark Has Teeth. I was thinking about the old Mac the Knife song from Kurt Weill. And the shark, he has teeth and he carries them in his face, which is so much charming in German. Und der Haifisch, hat Zähne und trägt ihn im Gesicht. I won't try to sing it for you because it's kind of weird sounding if you hear it in the original German, especially the Lotte Lenya version that was done in the late 1950s or so, that always popped up with an oscilloscope on the old Ernie Kovacs show. That's dating me. Anyway, down memory lane. So, most sharks are known in the fossil record by teeth. Once in a while, you can find a little bit more of their cartilaginous bodies that get preserved under very rare circumstances. But teeth are almost the common element there. And but they do get around, and they live in the sea, after all. So there's a paper from 2014, which would therefore predate Jeanson's book, that I'm putting a linking up on groups from France, and then another group from the late Cretaceous from North America, from a 2019 paper by Gates et al. That dates slightly after the Jeanson book. Upshot of all of this is you'll be able to see the enormous range of just that one family and its relationships of cousins, and the indication of, based upon their very distinctive tooth structure, how far back they're going. They got systematics too. And so there's a paper by Dose Akbulut from 2008, which suggests that it puts that family into the bigger perspective of the other shark groups. And there's a brand new paper, Kim 2021, which also puts things into even larger perspective. So you'll be able to get a good sense about what's going on compared to the tiny little cartoon that's going on in Jeanson land. Now, the other half of the show relates to that whole source methods thing and how it applies in areas other than creationists talking about design features and shark teeth and anything else that they may come up with. Because you can get into terrible trouble if you start using bad methods, over reliance on secondary sources that you don't fact check, paring data fields down to fit a preconceived dogma, and all of that stuff. And so part 2 relates to a thing I encountered on the Twitter prior to Elon Musk buying the place, by the way. Senator John Kennedy, one of the Rhino Trumpistas in the Senate, so therefore technically one of my employees. And in October, he tweeted how, quote, "The Biden administration mismanaged America's economy and it's compromising America's national security," unquote. And in a rare example, he actually put a link up. And the link was to an opinion piece at the Wall Street Journal that was behind a paywall, so no way to actually read the full content of the thing. But it turned out to be drawing on a new study by the Heritage Foundation, the hyper-conservative bunch who gave us all of those Trump court appointments. Isn't that sweet? And so I'll be putting that link up. It's about military strength executive summary. Now, here's where we can start playing with the source data. Bad methods yield bad results. And the Heritage Foundation and the Rhino Trumpista senator who played upon him illustrate just as much as any creationist would. To wit, one of their little pundits at the Heritage Foundation, Thomas Spohr, contributed info about the Army. And I'll be putting the linkage up specifically to that military strength assessment, U.S. military power, U.S. Army. And it includes a bit on the crisis in recruiting. He was aware of a lot of the factors that are actually known to be affecting that, which is the decline in Americans of the age that they want to have. There's a 20% drop if you thought about the numbers he was giving. Hi, Slade. And the fact that the low unemployment rate was making the military career rather less attractive as an option of last resort, which it is for an awful lot of people. And then there's a high rejection rate due to obesity. And he gave some details and sources, but the info that suggests only about a quarter go that way. And so there's a paper from 2010 on military applicants denied due to obesity that's relevant to this point. I'll be putting a link up to that. Here's where Spohr jumps off the gangplank, though, because he added another factor, which was COVID vaccinations. And there's a subculture in the Rhino Trumpistas that just are infuriated with the idea that people, oh, hello, Ian Chen, hello, good morning. He was absolutely infuriated that you see on Twitter all the time. There are various people in both the House and the Senate who are fuming now about the fact that people in the military that were refusing to be vaccinated were going to be terminated, not physically terminated, but just moved out of the Army, often given honorable discharges, et cetera, et cetera. But the point is that in the military environment, they couldn't tolerate lack of vaccination on this point. And yeah, morning, it's just after midnight here in Spokane. On this particular aspect, Spohr gave absolutely no documentation, which immediately piqued my curiosity. And it's probably understandable why he didn't give any documentation, because the numbers weren't helping his case. As it turns out, the Military Times had putting up a post in 2022, which is breaking down what troops were actually getting kicked out over COVID vaccines. And it turns out 3,400 active troops were discharged for those reasons. Most of them, 1,968, were in the Marines, which, by the way, represented 1% of their total force of 215,000 Marines. The Navy came next with 798. That was 0.2% of the fleet. There were 345 in the Army, which was, after all, the topic of Spore's claim. That's 0.07%. And then the Air Force at 287, 0.04%. Notice how far down the Army is on this. Utterly trivial factor. This struck me because one of the topics that Jackson and I are going to be discussing in the books we're doing after The Rocks Were There Volume 2 is on conspiracy thinking and how bad methods apply to that, whether it's flat earthers or vaccine skeptics or climate science denialists or Holocaust deniers and various others. That one bad method to rule them all. And so I've been keeping track of various folk that discuss the COVID matter, and this will be popping up into there. But it's still the same bad method. And so one of the things, if you follow me on Twitter, you may have noticed that I'm quite relentless in asking politicians when they make a claim, because they're technically my employee, where's your sources? And spot how many times they don't give sources. Or if they do, it's actually kind of an opinion piece at a favorable site, like themselves getting interviewed on Fox Trump Pravda or Newsmax. Or very, very rarely some secondary material like Breitbart. Jim Jordan is prone to using Breitbart a lot. This is exactly the same methodologically as if a creationist were linking to Answers in Genesis or creation.com as their authoritative source. And if you were already aware of how bad the sources were, then the fact that they're relying so heavily on them is yet another feature to indicate why it's a bad idea, as the video is going to be called, "Don't let your Tortucans grow up to be politicians." Definitely don't let them grow up to be presidents. We had one just previously that definitely fell into that category. Various nations have people of that level. I think you can find them in Hungary. You can find them in Turkey. You can find them in Russia. You can see it in Poland. You can see it in North Korea. You can see it in China. You can see it in a lot of different places where ideologues of varying stripes are utilizing exactly the same kind of bad methodology. They live in an insular bubble. Some have argued that one of the reasons why Putin had made some of the bad judgments that he's been doing lately is that he comes in kind of a narrow little niche, which is an old tradition in Russia. I mean, Stalin conducted a gigantic purge of the military for political reasons back in the 1930s before the Second World War. And surprise, surprise, that slowed down some of their responses to Hitler when Hitler decided to turn their back on him and invade them in 1941. Slade Chimera, the Aussies have taken over the chat. Okay, welcome into the... It's all because of you people on the other side of the flat earth, or taco-flavored earth, shaped earth, which is how I kind of prefer it, are up at a normal hour as opposed to night owls like me operating at this wee hours of the morning when at least the signal is still running it good. So I don't think in any sense whatsoever that methodology is something that should be compartmentalized into just the sciences. It applies absolutely everywhere. In a everyday life, we do that all the time without even thinking about it, in the sense, if you're going to buy a new water heater, or if you're going to buy a new car or a power tool, you're going to be, yes, I'm the one that's on the wrong side of the pizza-shaped planet. Yes, there. That would explain an awful lot about me, don't you think? I'm on the crust side, and all of you are on the pepperoni and tomato sauce cheese side, or for those who are of that persuasion, pineapple and anchovies. I don't think so. Anyway. And so when I approach people of ideological nature from any point of view, especially when they're punditing on stuff that I have reason to believe is claptrap, I'm always trying to ferret out what their sources are. And you'll find that in social media in particular, it's really tough to do that, to pry loose on there. And in part because I think an awful lot of them don't actually have any sources to deal with. Now, you can find others who do this other than right-wing politicians. I bumped into occasional Marxists, and they're just as bad. You could argue that Marxism today, Marxist-Leninism, the extreme form, rather than just that vague socialist term, which is what an awful lot of right-wingers like to bandy about, that doctrinal Marxist-Leninists are just as tunnel vision as any creationist or Donald Trump supporter. It popped up because the old Soviet Union did a bad thing with the Ukrainians back in the 1930s, aka starving them to death. And naturally, the Ukrainian people have been annoyed at this ever since. And Marxists don't like to admit that that's ever happened. And so you have a cottage industry of apologists who strongly insist to this day that there was never a famine in Ukraine during the 30s, or if there was one, it wasn't due to Stalin. Oh, no, no, that was just accidental. And so you get all sorts of rationalizations on things. And to some extent, this gets embroiled with the fact that some of the people who were whistleblowing on this back in the 1960s and 70s were coming from right wing of center politically. And in the same way that during the Holocaust, during the Second World War, when things started leaking out about how much terrible things were going on in Europe, you find people segmenting off, well, we can't really believe that claim because that must be coming from left-wingers, so Hitler really can't be all that bad. And you find this to this day, that there are particularly militarist types in Japan that don't like to deal with what was going on with the rape of Nanking during the Second World War, 1930, well, just before that, 1937, or for the same reason that even though it wasn't the modern regime in Turkey that had the Armenian genocide, to this day, the Turks just really get into conniption fits about ever owning up about that. We have our own little axes to grind in relation to how we treated Native Americans and all that, but I think we've come to recognize that much more openly than a lot of other cultures have on their dark sides in their past. So all of this stuff, then you'll notice now we're leaking over into politics and history. I think any area where you have a sound methodology means that you've got to apply it universally. And the first order of business is to get all the facts straight. And then you then try to make judgments about what the big picture is and what policies need to be done. If there are people that should be held accountable, or what aspects of society need to be done to redress actions. All of that depends on getting the facts straight. And I would contend that when you have a group of people who have unsound methodology and they get a pseudo history that they want to be true, or a pseudo climatology that they want to be true, or a pseudo governmental military policy that they want to be true, or fill in the blank, it's not going to do well. Yeah, Native Australians have got a raw deal too. That's absolutely correct. Basically, one of the premises that I would argue philosophically, take the data field, develop things from it. I don't think any people on Earth can ever be a viable colonial power. It's just impossible. Belgians, who are not exactly known as the nastiest people on Earth, nonetheless, when they were running the Belgian Congo, were some of the nastiest people on Earth. Dutch, Holland, which is known for its open-mindedness and all of that, had a very bad track record. When we ran the Philippines, not a great thing. And so in the case of Australia, which you had a coastal group of natives living in the hinterlands, and then you had colonials coming in as part of a penal colony in Australia. Oh, and by the way, in volume 2 of the Paralogues of Phileas Fogg, Australia figures in the tale. You get to visit Melbourne in 1873, and a little bit of sight of how different it is from the San Francisco elites of 1872 or some of the other areas. I was quite intrigued doing the research on that, putting that feature out. But these are not trivial issues. In terms, it pops up in terms of methodology. We find the issues about how climate change is producing terrible droughts and fire hazards in Australia just as much in California, and now we're seeing in Texas and Kansas here in the United States. Various places. The thing is that politics can't make the science go away. And so no matter what the politicians might decree, they can't make the Colorado River have more water in it, or they can't make the Yangtze and some of these rivers that are drying up, or the Mississippi that's had a big drawdown during droughts, or the Rhine. I think they were reaching the point where they were seeing a whole bunch of little islands and stuff and boats and things. Las Vegas, some of the places where the lake had drawn down so much in Lake Powell that there were occasional cars and dead bodies and stuff that had been dropped off by gangsters years ago that have now been exposed, and they can find out what's going on in there. But no politician can do any better there than King Canute did, supposedly trying to decree that the tides would not come in. Nah, not going to work. And of course, science deals with all the things that are in that category of that are true whether you like it or not. Just live with it and move on. So the methodology issue is an interesting one to do. It's also a fun thing as a detector kit to find people that may be putative Tortucans. Because if you ask somebody who is an ideologue but doesn't really have a data field that they're drawing on, they're simply repeating tropes. The moment you try to ask them background questions and source data questions, eyes are glazing over, deer in the headlights. They're in terrible trouble, and they'll just move on to something else. One thing that I have yet to see happen adequately, and this can happen and should happen everywhere on the planet where there is still a free press, is that reporters should be asking methods questions, which they tend not to do. They tend to ask questions about what policies there are. If you look at Meet the Press, or if you look at This Week with Stephanopoulos, or various shows interviewing on former Vice President Pence was interviewed on Meet the Press a few weeks ago, and then on PBS just I think last week, and he's still as boring as paint drying, and rather an annoying waffler. But the thing is that no questions were being asked relating to, you have a position based on what? What sources are you relying on to derive those data fields that you're making such big hay about? And so it's advisable that you want to prod any reporters to do that, and you want to also operate that as yourself in your own personal interactions and decide who to vote for. It's been particularly funny because of, now that Musk owns Twitter, he's been going on, and various people have been going on about the idea that somehow or other Twitter was interfering in the 2020 election. And I pointed out, I didn't change my vote based on anything on Twitter. Did the person making the claim change their vote based on Twitter? Did anybody do that? So in what respect was this supposed interference going on? If you were getting all of your information only from what you see on Twitter, then you really are needing to get out more. And this is not a wise thing for you to do. So I don't know yet what kind of prodding that we can do to media to be able to get them to get more on the source methods bandwagon and examine things. You see that to some extent when you get to the fact-checking level, because they'll check the facts and find out what the data are, but that's an exploration of data floor. It still is not delving into the mindset of people who think that any data they want that repeats what they want to be true is necessarily valid. So, battle for Gaia, buzz? I'm not sure. what that refers to, you'll need to explain that. I've encountered this sort of thing before, and it's always been due to human error. So we've got about 25 minutes on there. Any questions in the from the audience, since we're holding on in a halfway decent thing, about the relationship between the particular topics, from sharks to the methodology of American politicians or the history of the universe, any of that stuff. I'll give you an update on what I've been piling up. I've been still finishing out the Acts and Facts that Institute for Creation Research puts out. They've now spittled down to where they're every other month rather than every month. So when we get into the 2022 era, we're having fewer issues to contend with. But the main thing is they are very glossily produced magazines that repeat tropes again and again and again and again. And once in a while, they bump into actual technical literature, as I've been pointing out in previous examples of some of these things, much of which is going to be entering into the new book, because a great deal of it bumps into systematics issues. And it's an important thing as well to get a measurement of how tremendously repetitive they are in terms of hammering away at the doctrinal trope and referencing back to themselves as if they had resolved that issue. All of that bears into what, you're under the wrong account again. Well, there you go. When I see Gaia, of course, I'm immediately thinking of Lovelock and his notions about a homeostatic planet where life basically calibrates the planet to suit itself. And although he could get into some awkward little boxes, yes, my hive science, there you go, Bugs. Yes, you meant to buzz under this one. That Gaia is an idea that there's an aspect of it that I'm very impressed with. And that is the overall idea that once life gets going, it tends to be very invasive, and it rearranges the dynamics of what the planet is doing. Yeah, James Downer, that is my new pet for debate. That the approach to things from the source methods direction would be to look at everything from that angle and work your way out to larger contexts. How to get reporters to do that? Contact local newspapers if they've got letters to the editor. Ask about things. I think this is a vital issue for dealing with every aspect of society. Part of being well informed. Oh, that's what your new animal channel. Ah, okay. Well, okay. I love to plug all of the folk circulating around the old RJ, although with the short number of people viewing the episode each week, don't be gobsmacked that it doesn't produce an instantaneous urge. Ones that have much bigger audiences than I have, Gutsick, Gibbon, and that pile is quite a different kettle of fish, or Apologia. Hopefully Apologia will be doing a show with Jackson and I when we get our next volume out, because he did a little promo show on volume 1, and we'll want to hit him up to do volume 2 as well. Oh, yeah, there we go. Let's put that up there so everyone can take a look at that. Anyway, the Gaia hypothesis in relation to, for me, like Mars, is a beautiful example of that. That my gut suspicion is if there is any life, boy, it's sure hunkered down, because life under a Gaia model would be finding ways of modifying the circumstances of the planet in much more overt ways than it appears to be the case. And so that's why I'm on the skeptic side in my suspicion that Mars is probably dead as a doornail. It might have had life at one point and fizzled out, but all of that's highly relevant to figure out to what extent that Gaia hypothesis applies generically in the universe, to whether life systems will either make a go of it, and if they make it over a little hurdle, boom, then they become terraformers or Marsiformers or Europaformers, as the case may be. If we could find life on any of the other bodies in our solar system, or even fossilized life in any of these areas, it would certainly be highly relevant to kind of put some calibration scales on all of that. That's why we need to have live scientists and microscopes and all that going to Mars, rather than trying to do everything by extremely ingenious robots. But it's the same reason that we don't explore Antarctica with remotes. We actually send people down there to see, because we can find stuff there that would require an awfully sophisticated robot to be able to do. So anyway, well, hopefully I'll be able to live long enough after I've managed to finish the other Paralogs novels as well, that we'll be seeing some things on that, and be able to see manned space flight to the moon again. And in the case of Spokane, Washington, finally, maybe they will finish the North-South Freeway, which they've been working on since the 1970s. Oh, you stepped foot in the church of my childhood. This just as a tourist, or were you there for a service? I've always found the architecture of an awful lot of churches very interesting, and synagogues, mosques. In fact, I keep passing the big new mosque that they built next to Moses Lake that I pass on the interstate going to Seattle each time. And they finally got it to the finished point to where now it's lit up and that around. And it's a big box with a center tower that sticks up. Oh, your dad needed a lift. Okay. That can happen. Yes, there we go. The ones with the least interesting architecture are the kind of mom and pop religions that prop up, Protestants in particular, that may be having a service in what looks like a barn. At least the more established churches, where they have more money, can create magnificent architectural things. And so you have Chartres Cathedral, and you have St. Peter's Basilica, and you find vast structures that are assembled around the Kaaba and the like. Whether or not such things are more or less time wasting than building giant stadiums for football, aka soccer, basketball, any of the other things that we do with our grand stadiums, or any other activity, big theaters and gardens and the like, that to borrow a line from the Bible, man does not live by bread alone. And so there's more to things than that. And even though the content of the religion may be invalid or of marginal utility in certain contexts, nonetheless, it can still act as a tremendous inspiration for art and music and architecture. If you think of Bach's cantatas and music in Hindu cultures, the ragas and all of that, that human creativity finds ways of using all sorts of impetuses. And so I'm always been intrigued by structures and artifacts and artwork that are interesting, independent of the culture that produced them and whether or not they were believing accurate or inaccurate things. So, this is just a hall similar to what the Jehovah's Witnesses do. Yes, that's so. If you're going to have a religion, at the least, there we go. There we go. If you're going to have a religion, at the very least, have it in impressive surroundings. The question is, how do you pay for the bloody thing? And if you're oppressing people to do it, it's hard to say that it's necessarily a good idea. But millennia later, we can run around Chartres Cathedral and look at it and be impressed by the architecture on it. In the same way we get into that with the restoration of Notre Dame after the fire. And I, as a cultural historian, would want the Buddha in Afghanistan to be restored at some point. It's unlikely to happen in the current regime with the Taliban back in charge, but we'll find out what happens. We live in an amazingly complicated world. So I think that pretty much covers all the little bits and pieces for this time. As I said, we'll have a couple more weeks maybe to get some shows in before basically going into a vacuum until the new year. and at which point we'll be nearing, hopefully, the tailing ends of Jeanson's charts. He's still got a few more things. He's revamping stuff on horses and things, which he's alluded to in earlier sections of the tale and was getting wrong back then. So I'm not anticipating any new sources popping along the line on there. Everybody keep safe. Watch out for Mpox and Omicron and all the other science fiction namey viruses that we have knocking around at the moment. And if you've got weather problems in the places that you are, hunker down and stay safe and warm and comfortable to the extent that you can. And we'll see you all next week. Okie dokie.